Hi, welcome everyone. Welcome here today for this cross-disciplinary conversation on menopause and women's health with a particular focus on the whole person's care for women. And we're here together with an international team, I must say. And to introduce myself quickly, I am from the Netherlands. I'm in The Hague at the moment, and I'm a psychiatric nurse and a yoga therapist. And I'm very happy to be here today with you. I see some people perhaps are still coming in. Just take your time. And I would like to, hi, I'm delighted to be here from Edinburgh. Welcome. Great. So feel free to share in the chat where you are from. This is always nice to see where the audience is living. So can I start with Brian? Can you introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. I'm Brian
Hi,
Grosam.
Brian. Yeah.
Hi, Anneke. I'm in the United States. I'm a doctor of acupuncture and Chinese medicine. I've been practicing for a long time. I did my PhD research in China, where my dissertation was on menopause. And my research showed really good results. So I continued my research and clinical training on menopause, and I focus primarily on hot flashes, and because I'm really interested in what causes them, what creates them, both from Western medicine and Eastern medicine. So I've been doing a lot of that over 10 years. I met Claire Wilson from Singing Dragon a few years back, and she asked if I was interested in turning my knowledge into a book. And this is coming out this December. So understanding and treating hot flashes and menopause with Chinese medicine. It's basically all my notes and research. So thank you for everyone for coming.
Yeah, beautiful. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you.
So from the US, we move to Canada. Shelly, can you please show yourself and introduce yourself?
Hey,
Hi, so
Anneke.
great
Hey,
to see
Brian.
you, Shelly.
Yeah, hi, everybody. So really happy to be here. Thank you. So I am in Canada. I'm in the western part of Canada and about 3 hours away from the Canadian Rocky Mountains. And it's a place called Sylvan Lake, Alberta. And professionally, I am a physiotherapist, a yoga therapist, and I've been practicing for about 23 years, integrating yoga into my physio practice. My specialties are working with people with chronic pain, with pelvic floor health issues, and then I also have a really passion for compassion. Just like Anneke, we both really have a passion for that and an interest, and in particular self-compassion, which is really relevant for today's topic, I think. And then I'm an educator, so I teach courses to yoga professionals and healthcare professionals on this integration of yoga into healthcare. And I've done a little bit of research. I'm not going to say I'm a researcher, but I have collaborated in some research. Most currently, the one that I've collaborated with is the effects of yoga on balance and fall-related injuries in peri and postmenopausal women. And then I'm also an author and co-editor of the book Yoga and Science and Pain Care, Treating the Person in Pain, of course, with Singing Dragon, amazing publisher. And that my co-editors are Neil Pearson and Marlisa Sullivan. So thank you.
Welcome. Welcome, Shelly. Great to see you here. And last but not least, Petra, all the way in the UK.
Hi, everyone. It's lovely to be here with you. Hi. And I feel very honored to be in the presence of Shelly and Brian and Anneke. So thank you, Singing Dragon, for bringing us all together. We've been quietly going off and doing our areas of expertise linked to women in the stages of menopause. And it's so lovely to see how our work beautifully overlaps, bringing Western medical science and Eastern wellbeing together. So I'm in Brighton, which is on the south coast of the UK, right by the sea. And I'm the founder of Menopause Yoga, the first menopause specific style of practice of yoga to help women manage their menopause symptoms. I'm also a member of the British Menopause Society for Health Practitioners, and I work with menopause specialist doctors in the UK. And yeah, like everyone else, I have a book which has just come out, which is Menopause Yoga, a holistic guide to supporting women on their menopause journey. So it's mainly focused as a teacher's guide, because like Shelly, I'm an educator. I train other yoga teachers to teach menopause yoga. And we have about 300 teachers so far in 15 countries around the world. So it's a really exciting time to be working with women in this field.
Wow, beautiful. Wow, so great to, like I saw also in the chat, it's a great panel and introductions, and I totally agree. Very happy to be here with all of you, and also happy to be with all the participants here. And before we go any further, I would like to remind you that you can ask your questions in the chat. So there's a chat function, and also we will have some space to answer the questions at the end. For now, we are going to dive right in. And to start, I would like to consider the idea of self-worth. I think this is a very important topic, and many women, they don't view themselves as worthy or respecting maybe their cycles in life, where, of course, the menopause is one important one, it's not the only one. I would like to start with Petra. Can you give us a very brief history?
Okay, so thank you very much. It's so hard to give a brief history because women have been going through menopause since they have been beings, human beings. But what is interesting is the cultural and history and the context around menopause and where we are in the Western Hemisphere, because we're all speaking from the Western Hemisphere here. If we go back to the first early mentions of menopause, it wasn't called that, it was called the climacteric, which was first named by Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher. And it was simply without judgment, without good or bad, it was observed that, you know, men could continue conceiving children until, you know, 80s or whatever, but women seemed to cease that ability to conceive around about the age of sort of in their late 40s and early 50s. It was slightly earlier in those days. And so he observed it, and he also observed some other behaviors that came with women at this time. But it wasn't pathologized. It didn't really become pathologized as an illness until the 1800s, where during what we in the UK call the Victorian era, in the 1800s, 1821, it was actually a French doctor who decided to give a name for this syndrome, this ease. And it was a time in medical history where medicine was trying to gain more traction, more respect. And it was also a time in the Victorian era where the Victorians were putting things in glass boxes in museums and categorizing. So women got categorized and put in those boxes. And that's when he used the phrase la menopause. Excuse my French, anyone out there who has better pronunciation. But la menopause, the menopause, was actually a French translation of ancient Greek, which he created, saying it was meno, meaning, or menos, meaning monthly, the monthly women's cycle, and pause, meaning an end or a cessation of that monthly cycle. So that was when it first became pathologized as an illness. And at that time, actually even a little bit before then, women were going to doctors to find a solution to their infertility, because women didn't understand why it was that they ceased being able to conceive after a certain number of years. But it was also a time in culture and history when women who came from wealthy families would be sent to a sanatorium with an attack of the nerves and given laudanum, which was an opiate, to help manage their menopause symptoms such as irritability, anger, as well as what was called hysteria. And that also leads on to the treatment of women with hysterectomies to remove the problem, which was seen to be the woman's womb. But there were also clitorectomies because it was seen that sexual stimulation was actually a cause, a problem behind this. And then women had to undergo things such as vaginal douches using arsenic and various other toxic forms and metals that were used to cleanse their vaginas. And excuse me if you weren't expecting to hear that language quite so soon in your day, wherever you are in the world. But we're just sort of, getting graphic, talking about the medical science. So, and then women who were not from a wealthier family were sent to insane asylums, and they could be sent to insane asylums by their fathers, their brothers, or their husbands for what was considered to be in unruly behavior or insanity, not behaving as a woman should do. So, and then if you were to also look back in history, even though it wasn't named, feminist historians are now looking at women's history and saying, witches were often women in their middle-aged years where their behavior wasn't acceptable. And thousands of women right across Europe were burnt at the stake or drowned in their middle-aged years. And even if you go to America, there are now historians looking at things such as the Salem witch trials and noting that many of the women later on in those witch trials were actually in their middle-aged years. So if we understand the history behind menopause and how it became pathologized, we can perhaps understand our negative perception of menopause that we in the West as women have carried with us. And there is an element of fear that I certainly see amongst women, and I certainly experienced myself when I was going into perimenopause of, oh no, I'm not ready for this. And I think that resistance and that fear that comes from the culture in which we live has a large part to play. So I'm going to stop there. And I said it's a huge subject.
Yeah, but it's very interesting. It's very interesting. And I think it really sets a great tone for our further conversation here. So thank you very much for explaining this a little bit. I think it's very interesting for everybody to hear this. And I'm curious about this is like more a Western perspective, right? That you were talking about. And we all come from different areas. And Brian, more Eastern perspective. So you studied and treated menopause with Chinese medicine and acupuncture. What do you think the Eastern perspective on menopause is? Menopause and health?
Well, from a Chinese medicine perspective, when I was doing my research, there's not a lot in the classical text explaining or talking about menopause or hot flashes or any of the symptoms. In the modern texts, basically 1950s and up until now, menopause has its own section in the neurological books and the gynecology books, et cetera, et cetera. So the classical texts don't talk about menopause per se, but if we go back to the most famous Chinese medicine book in our history, it's called the Huangdi Neijing, which is the Yellow Emperor's Internal Classic, which is roughly 2,500 years old. And it really wasn't written by a single person, but it's kind of a gathering of many ideas from many practitioners way back then. And it's interesting, the very first chapter in the Yellow Emperor talks about age. The very first chapter talks about women. It's the first mention, and how women age in increments of 7 years. So if we do the simple counting of sevens, 7, then 14 is when the menses begin. 21, they begin to have children, and up until 42, where the cycles become irregular, and then by age 49, the menses cease. And there's a lot of really good information we can extract from entries in this book about how a woman's blood in essence, comes to fruition and then finally declines and then ceases, the ceasing of the menstruation. But that stops at age 49. So what happens after age 49? Well, the book doesn't go into anything about menopause, right? And what the cycle basically does is then starts again. So from age 49, then you're back to age 1 or 50. So the cycle comes all the full circle. And a lot of Chinese medicine scholars now, we call it like the second spring, or I just like to think of it as a rebirth. So the whole idea behind the pathophysiology is the growth, the building up of healthy essence, healthy blood in the body, and then how it declines. And the natural treatment for that is then to rebuild and renourish the body, once women come to menopausal transition. So,
Yeah.
In the clinic, it's kind of interesting because, this is both for Western and Eastern medicine practitioners, where we focus so much on the symptoms, get rid of the hot flashes, treat the insomnia, treat the anxiety, throw medicine at it, herbs, all this kind of stuff. And the real strategy, what I find in my practice, is to treat from the root. After 3 or more decades of a monthly cycle, the woman's body is fairly taxed to keep rebuilding blood every month, right? So in this modern day and age, the reason why it wasn't talked about in the classics is because it's a different day and age where women didn't have as the same difficulty of replenishing blood because the food was more nutritious, they had more activity, they had less stress, versus today, the body is completely taxed. And so by the time women hit menopausal transition, the blood is completely deteriorated and depleted. And so it's necessary to build from the ground up.
And I would love to thank you so much for this explanation. And I would love to hear more about the second spring and how to build from the ground up and from the root up. But before we go there, because I know that you all have very interesting perspectives on this, and we will get there. But first, I want to hear Shelly. And because you are working, of course, you're mixing the Western and the Eastern dynamics by being a physiotherapist, but also yoga therapist. And I would like to ask you, what is your experience in treating clients, and also what are the common issues that you notice, what you hear about in this, like also in these more challenging times these days?
Yeah, so a little bit similar to what we've been talking about. So basically, when people come to see me, there is this sense of that something is wrong or bad, so Petra, you already alluded to that, this idea that it's very pathologized, this stage of life. So that's definitely, I see that. And then the other couple things is this mentality of a fix-it approach. And so Brian was alluding to that as well. And I want to be clear, we're not, blaming, not putting the blame on, people, because this is all of us. This is my way of thinking as well, that I'm trying to, of course, learn to shift and change with all that I'm learning through yoga. But when people come to see me, because of our culture and because of just how we're raised and how our whole medical system is, it's this idea of, it's like we're broken or something's wrong or bad. And then we want something external to fix it, like a machine. And I remember even in physiotherapy school, sometimes back in the 90s, I would even use that analogy. with patients early on, talking about, oh, your body's like a machine and wear and tear, and which is really unfortunate. And I'm learning more now, and so I don't use that anymore. But we're not machines. And what I think we're missing in our contemporary healthcare and our medical system is we forget that we are living organisms, and we are dynamic systems, and all of the systems are integrated. And so that's what the ancient wisdom traditions do a really great job of. I mean, I'm obviously more familiar with yoga and not the other ones. The idea is that the body is to be honored and respected and trusted, the body's innate wisdom. And so that's one, or another one, one aspect that I really see when people come to see me, is that they've never thought of that idea before. And then the final one is this reductionistic approach. So it's the idea that our current medical system and philosophy, what it does well. And thank goodness, that we do have these specialties, and that we do have the ability to fix and do certain interventions and surgeries and prescriptions when needed. But the way we see it, and when I say we, that's all of us here on this panel and our colleagues, that sometimes it's a little too late, and we could have done things beforehand. And that's, again, what these ancient wisdom traditions really help us with. And so things like yoga, we really have this integrated approach. So you're looking at the whole human being and all of their aspects of their existence: physical, mental, emotional, energetic, spiritual. And not only, and this is a bit of a tangent, but it's really important, our current healthcare system is recognizing the different aspects that of all of our existence. And so we call it the biopsychosocial and spiritual approach. However, what's really interesting I'm finding is that we still silo it. So we still look at, okay, these are the issues, the psychological issues, and this is all that we're going to do with psychology. These are the physical issues. This is what we're going to do to help your physical. This is the social, and we still silo it. It's really, we're trying so hard. But the ancient wisdom traditions and yoga, they really have a more complex view that, no, you know what, you can't separate it. It's all one. So that's the first part. And then just briefly, and I actually wrote down some bullet points just to help me remember, because your question was some of the symptoms. Petra already said some of these, but often what I see with people are exactly what Petra had said, the things about the brain fog, lack of concentration, attention, and then these emotional sort of reactivity. So maybe anxiety, some irritability, the hot flashes, the night sweats, things like that. And then even disturbed sleep. I work with people that have a lot of pelvic floor health issues. So they may come with some pelvic pain, and lo and behold, we find out it could be from some of the vaginal dryness and some of the thinning of the tissues that take place. And then weight gain is often a common one because of some of the metabolic changes. And just the last couple of things I want to say is to remember that all of these things, like these are normal, and we can embrace them and actually change our relationship with them and get help to manage them, so that we are living, thriving and living more joyfully amidst all of these. And just a note too, that another thing that I see, because maybe it's because it's such a passion of mine, but I do see that women tend to have, in this phase particularly, I see they tend to have this low self-worth, which is what you started with, Anneke, but also a low self-compassion and low self-love and acceptance, especially of their bodies, because of the way the bodies are changing. And we're not educated that this is a beautiful thing, and that the little, the weight gain, and it's beautiful, and our bodies are meant to change. And so there's this real lack of, I guess I would say, knowledge and education out there that I see. And I know I keep saying and finally, but there is one more point. To be clear, people don't come to see me necessarily with, the anxiety or, with the hot flashes, and that they come to see me because they're having issues, usually with pain. So some kind of pain, and it could be in the pelvic floor, like I said, or it could be in their hips or back, their neck, their shoulders. So that's why people initially come see me. And then we figure out that, oh, some of this, what's happening with you may be related to or influenced by this phase of your life.
Thank you. Wow. Thank you, Shelly. And well, I think altogether we can clearly see like what are some important parts of the issues here that we try to focus on. Although only one conversation, we already figured that out before, that one conversation is of course not enough but we can all already start to bring a little bit of focus on like what do we see from our different perspectives, and how can we go a little bit more deeper into the roots of it. How can we reframe some things? So I would like to go further on that in a little moment. But well, one little thing for the audience. There is a digital goodie bag. This is a little commercial break here. Look at the chat box. There you see a link for a goodie bag. So this is very interesting for everybody who was signing up for this event. And also there is a Q&A. Claire was asking question. I think I'll leave it a little bit because we will go to some solutions in a little bit. But first, I would like to go to Brian again. And I would like to ask you, what is your approach actually to reframing? Because what we hear, I hear beautiful things about treating from the root, second spring. These are already, those words for me are like heartwarming.
Thank you. It's really interesting because when most women come to my clinic, my expertise is hot flashes, a tremendous amount of patients that are coming in desperation, which makes it a little anxious for me because they really want relief as fast as they can. And for my own research, my own clinical research, treating hot flashes, I mean, I have a select number of acupuncture points and herbs that work really, really well in certain situations. So if you have like 10 women that come in, 10 women are going to need 10 different types of herbal treatments and acupuncture strategies, because we're all uniquely different. We're not just like 10 people, 10 hot flashes, everyone gets the same thing. We know it works sometimes, but not always. So by and large, some women will respond in really, really quickly. It's like an oil change for a car. A few acupuncture treatments, they're like, oh my God, I feel so much better. And then, and you're a hero, right? You're a master. And then in other cases, I can't even touch the hot flashes or any of the symptoms. Let's say anxiety or insomnia, body aches and pains, fatigue, pelvic floor, urogenital things and stuff like that. When they're more in a severe category, you really, really have to have that conversation with them that this is not going to respond quickly. It's going to take time. Your body needs to actually heal. It needs to go through the rejuvenation process, and we need to nourish. We need to support the body from its roots. And that there's so many things that are involved in there. Actually, the research shows, scientific research shows in most chronic disorders, diseases, 50% of them are treatable. And why is that? It's lifestyle habits. When we change our lifestyle habits, meaning food, nutrition, hydration, sleep, rest, not overworking ourselves to death, meditation, minding our, mindfulness, watching our emotions and stuff like that. All of this is preventable, but it's not it's not like the 30-day challenge, right? It's like, oh, if I just drink water for 30 days, why aren't my hot flashes or why are my symptoms gone? It takes longer than that because it took 50 years to get to it, right? You have to, so my whole approach is, and you have to be, there's some finesse with that. You have to really, really take your time and really gain trust, gain trust in the clinic that, week after week, I'm not feeling better. And sometimes I'm getting worse. And it's like, well, you're at the beginning stages of menopausal transition. So it might, get worse before it gets better, right? But that's actually a good thing because the body knows what to do. The body, the hot flashes is really kind of a response, a healing response, and from a certain perspective. Some patients respond amazingly well, and some don't, and they just want a quick fix and they move on. But by and large, my clinical experiences, I really help, 75% of all patients, which is like 3 out of 4. So, wow. But it's taken a long time to really understand this. It's not like, oh, I'm just gonna use this point and this magic point treats your hot flashes. I hear that so much, from colleagues and patients that come in the clinic. Well, 5 years ago, this acupuncture or this person did this treatment and it took, and it went away. And why isn't it going away now? And it's like, well, everything's, unique in that regard. So.
Thank you. Thank you. It answers a little bit a question. Well, not really, but it has a little bit to do with Natasha's question. She was asking, do any of the panelists have any thoughts on talking to doctors about menopause symptoms? And because I hear you say it takes time, and this is often what doctors don't have. And so this is also what you said, Shelly, like we're really trying and do our best in the medical field, but it's also because often there's just not enough time for this holistic approach. She said, I find that they all just want to add more antidepressants to the one I take for depression. So just interesting to keep this in mind, this question. And I would like to go to Petra after this, because I wanted to ask you a little bit more about culture, because I know that you actually educate women to feel empowered and to embrace menopause as an opportunity for self-knowledge and a better health. So can you talk also a little bit about that in that context?
Yeah, well, thank you. Yes, so, my mantra is educate women to feel empowered so that they can embrace this change in their lives. And I think, just to take it back to my first point about culture and the history, is that if you view menopause as a negative change, and if you view the aging process negatively, and there's an element of fear in there, then there's a resistance. And it's so fascinating listening to everyone here on the panel talking, because, that resistance is resistance to change, not acceptance. And the resistance itself can create a physical tension in the body, creating more heat, the heat of literally physical muscular heat and tension, rather than relaxing and surrendering to the process of change, which is something that I know those of you who practice yin yoga as well would recognize is about surrendering and allowing the process to happen. And one of the techniques we use for hot flushes, as well as directing people to go to acupuncture and changing their lifestyle in terms of nutrition, doing less, etc. But one of the things we do is a hot flush wave, where we do a deep abdominal breathing practice that wave of breath moving through the body, which we know helps to calm the nervous system. But then giving a guided visualization where they allow themselves to let the hot flush flow through. Rather than the flush rising and coming up here and then roughly about the throat, people get into a panic state, don't they? And heart palpitations, and they kind of feel they're going to get swallowed up or consumed by the flames.
Or shame, maybe.
Well, there can be an embarrassment and shame about it as well, which actually exacerbates and makes the hot flushes more intense, last for longer, and more frequent. But yeah, so that attitude, your response to the hot flush can actually make your hot flushes worse. But if we can allow a woman to, not allow, if she can allow herself to relax into the sensation and know that she's not going to be consumed and, you know, as a result of it, then the flush can flow through her. And that can be a liberating experience. And then we work with the breath so that if she's in an outdoor situation at the shops or at work or whatever, that she has some breathing techniques and some mantras that she can use to help cool and calm. And that cooling and calming can also help to soothe and lessen the hot flushes. So, you know, absolutely, as Brian was saying, it's holistic. It's not, okay, here's a pill, no, let's stop your hot flushes. Let's give you some tips and technique, you know, advice about your whole lifestyle, as well as going to the source, which is what Brian's doing with the acupuncture. And that's also fascinating. So yes, the culture in which we live definitely affects women's response to their menopause. And just a little note, because I think Brian was almost alluding to this earlier, is that in the East, where there is potentially a myth that women never experienced menopause symptoms or it wasn't an issue. Now, it's true, it's not written about, and it wasn't something that was so severe that had to be registered and acknowledged. But women in modern China and modern Japan and modern India, there are actually now menopause societies. And these women are experiencing much more severe symptoms to a similar degree to women in the West. So what the thinking behind this is that they've changed what they eat. They're eating more modern westernized foods. They're eating more salt and sugar and caffeine and alcohol and smoking and less exercise. And they're having to work in terms of leading office-based lives, working with computers, for instance. And so their work-life balance, it's out of kilter. So I think that's fascinating to see how our modern lifestyle of the West, even when it's in the East, is aggravating women's symptoms. So we're kind of going against our nature. We're not doing, as Brian and Shelly said, we're not listening to our bodies and what they need because of the culture in which we live. And if I then, just to respond to Natasha, because this upsets me a lot, I see this a lot in my workshops and even the women coming to my training courses who are yoga teachers in the stage of the menopause, and they go to their GPs. Now, Natasha, I don't know which country you're living in. It would be really interesting to know which country you're living in right now, where your GP is based. But if you're in the UK, we have had a lot of ignorance in the UK. Doctors weren't given any menopause training in the past. If they had any menopause training in their 7 years of medical training, it was either a 2-hour module or nothing at all. And so if you go to a doctor and they offer you antidepressants, the modern medical science and the guidelines now are for doctors not to prescribe antidepressants. Antidepressants are not going to resolve your menopause issues, which are hormone related. So my advice would be to go and check out menopausedoctor.co.uk, or she's in America. Yeah, okay, so America is the origin of a lot of this ignorance due to the Women's Health Initiative research study that looked at estrogen and breast cancer, which is now recognized as being faulty. So obviously this is too much to talk about and give you guidance right here in this discussion. But we can give you some resources, and obviously you have all of our books to go to. But antidepressants are not the first port of call. That's just what you need to recognize. And just because I feel so passionately about this, I do need to say that the incidence of women taking their own lives at this stage in life is higher than at any other stage. So in the US and the UK, statistics show that women taking their own lives is highest at around the age of late 40s up to about 55, which is the menopausal transition on average. That's the average age of menopause transition. And antidepressants are not going to resolve the symptoms and can even make it worse. So just putting that there to say women need, whether you're going for Eastern, Western, or holistic care, we need proper education and proper advice from these medical practitioners.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much. And there's a question from Pat, and I want to go to that one in a little bit. First, I want to go to Shelly here, the symptom part and how we can deal with it in a holistic way. I would like to ask you more the physical symptoms and like especially maybe pain and how with compassion or in other ways can you deal with those from your perspective?
Sure. Well, and I just wanted to say too, Petra, when you were talking about the hot flashes and if we can just allow and not resist, and how the resistance can create more heat and all that, I was thinking, wow, that's almost identical to when we talk about pain. You know, if we're resisting and trying to fix it and get rid of it, the research shows that can create more of a threat in the system and then perpetuate the pain experience. So I thought that was really fascinating. So I think maybe where I'll go with you know this topic of pain, because it's a broad one, it's a big one, and I know we're now have just a few minutes left. So I think the key point, what I just really would like everybody to understand and to know, that regardless of the type of pain, so you know some of the symptoms that you might be feeling during this stage, like I had mentioned, might be pelvic pain, and regardless of the you know the area, maybe there might be some issues like vaginal dryness, like I had talked about, and perhaps something very simple, like Brian was talking about, sort of that symptom kind of management approach. So maybe something simple like a lubricant or a cream, maybe that's all that's needed. And voila, you know, the pain with intercourse is essentially even gone completely. Or if you have, let's say, other pain, like I said, it could be back, shoulder pain. We do have a link with shoulder pain in this phase of life, and without getting into the details, but it does seem to be related maybe to the systemic inflammation and immune response. It's very fascinating. And of course, the neuroendocrine you know, system is now changing. So it's very complex. But I'll just backtrack to make this simple as I can and as concise as I can, regardless of what kind of pain that you might be having. We all need to understand, in whatever stage of pain, if it's more acute or chronic, it doesn't matter, that pain is an experience. It's a sensory and emotional experience. So it's not one or the other. Pain it's an output, it's an experience, it's not an input. That's really important. So the input might be, or there might be different drivers. So going back to the example again of the vaginal dryness and the tissue, if there's some friction or some discomfort, we may say, well, that's the driver, but let's all really, really try to understand that the amount of pain that you're experiencing is not a direct indication of the state of the tissue. So in other words, there are many, many inputs into the system. And you may have, so some of those inputs, yes, it could be something at the tissue. Another input could be the fear, the anxiety, the emotions, the stress. It could be the state of your immune system, your hormonal system. An input could be your thoughts. We have a lot of research now. This is, and with our Western medical science as well, when we're getting into the contemporary pain science. So what we think, our attitudes, what we believe, our expectations. So if we're not educated about what we've been talking about here, and we think we're so scared of menopause, or we see the blood loss and we're just afraid, and we want to change it and we want to grasp and fix it, all of that feeds into then the state of your nervous system, and it's another input. And then those inputs all go to the spinal cord, and then they go up to the brain. And then the brain has to make sense of all of these inputs. And so there is not a pain experience yet. So you just have all of these inputs, and then the brain has to decide and weigh all this out and make a sensible story out of it all. And if the decision is that this is a threat, oh yeah, this is not good, then guess what? The output is going to be protection. And pain is but one of the outputs of protection. So it is one, but there's other outputs. And this will sound repetitive. What are other outputs that the brain or the human does? Anxiety, fear, anger, frustration. So emotions, how we breathe can change. We might go breathe shallow, more up in here, because it's a threat, right? And that helps us. Fear, fright, flight. That kind of breath pattern isn't always bad. But in this case, the body thinks there's a threat. So how we breathe may change. The body, so muscle tension, how we move might change. There's more guarding, and there's a whole bunch more, but those are all outputs. And then each of those outputs now become another input into the system. And so that we get this perpetuation. So to wrap this point up, on one hand, you may think, wow, this is overwhelming, this is complex, but this is great news. This is really good news, because then that means we have a lot of hope. We have a lot of possibilities. We have a lot of portals. There's a lot of options that we can do to help influence your pain. And that's the beauty of what all of us in this panel, this is what we do. And we try different things. We might go straight to the structure of the tissue. Brian might, like his example there, he might use, something that's very symptom management, or maybe we need to do a few different things. Maybe we need to work on breath and look at the tissue and structure, and also look at some cognitive reframing. And that question, I think it fits here too. There was something I saw in the chat about, embracing the emotions and not, don't we have to welcome and embrace the anger? And yes, everyone in this panel will agree with that. That was an amazing, I think it was maybe Pat that had said that.
Yeah, Pat.
That's yes, and that's part of this all, because if we think that anger is bad and all of the irritation, we're very frustrated and shameful and irritated. If we push all that down, that becomes another input into the system. So we need to embrace and learn, how do we cope with this and navigate. And Anneke, that's something that you do a lot, being a psychiatric nurse and yoga therapist, is how do we welcome all of these emotions in a way that's healthy and express them in a healthy way.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shelly, for talking about this in the way you do. It's very inspiring, I must say. And she was asking, Pat, don't we need to allow space for the emotions to arise? So you covered this already partly. The anger is often viewed negatively, and I think it's also how other people look at it. That's a very interesting one. It can be reframed, and many women are discovering their own boundaries, etc. And I think also here the word boundary is a very good one. I remember Petra, she was talking about empowerment, but empowerment, compassion, and boundaries are all in the same category. Without boundaries, no compassion, right?
And I just wanted to say, it's so interesting that once we, as Shelly was saying, once we learn to befriend our bodies, our changing bodies, and befriend all of these emotions, then our response to the menopause symptoms can change, and that can really revolutionize, everything, and make it a more empowering experience, not a loss, but a gaining, a stepping into fullness, into your spring. It's can be very exciting time for a woman in terms of her awareness. And absolutely, I'd agree with Shelly that about kindness and compassion. If you can treat yourself with that kindness and compassion at this stage in life, then you're going to get to the other side of the transition with support. And one very tiny thing, I was riddled with pain and didn't understand it, Shelly, when I was riddled with pain going through my perimenopause. I had 3 MRIs, I had injections in shoulders and backs and everything. I was on crutches, and the doctors said the amount of pain you're experiencing it's not showing up physically in your body, in your tissues. And I couldn't understand. And actually it was only by working very somatically with movement to release that pain in the body and accepting the changes that I was going through, but also going to acupuncture. Acupuncture, not for, oh, you've got a frozen shoulder, let's fix it. But that intuitive acupuncture that I know that you do, Brian, too, you know, working with the whole system. And that was where I was able to release the pain and start to let go. So
Beautiful.
I've certainly benefited from the two other lovely people on the panel here.
Yeah, great. So what I hear, there's no loss, but there's a gain. I think this is also very nice for the audience to think about it, because this is what reframing is all about. And instead of just passively listening, let's actively think about it. I know in some parts of the world, like here, it's getting late already, but still, what could be one gain? What's coming over the years, and how can we grow instead of decaying as we grow older as a woman? So maybe one thing to think about. And well, if you feel like it, type in the chat. It could be inspiring for everybody to share what you think is a gain, what you see in yourself or in other people, maybe your mother or in other women around you that are aging. So we're getting closer to the end, and I would like to check the chat here, because there's a Q&A that I would like to first point at Brian here, and maybe others have some ideas as well. Can the panelists share any tips on dealing with insomnia?
Well, insomnia, when the acupuncture and sometimes, you know, the Chinese herbs, if you get it right, it works fantastic. I have a set of treatments that I do for insomnia that actually work wonders. If you have an acupuncturist in your town and you put them in touch with me, I can easily teach them. They can, you know, read about it in my book as well. It's interesting that hot flashes, anxiety, and insomnia, they all kind of go all together in the physiology in the body, where, you know, there's oftentimes, you know, an imbalance of the yin and the yang, and the depletion of the blood. Actually, you know, when we look at blood is more yin, it's more water. And when our blood becomes deficient, you know, based on, you know, poor dietary habits, you know, lack of exercise, if there's not enough circulation, if there's just not enough good quality blood or enough blood circulation getting to the brain, the you know, the neuroendocrine system becomes depleted and it kind of burns out. If we think of blood as water, what's the opposite of water? It's fire. You know, and that fire actually is an activation. It's a yang activation of the nervous system, of the brain and stuff like that. So getting to the root is always not only trying to sedate the brain to sleep, because we're always thinking, let's sedate so I can sleep, let's sedate so I can sleep. But if you look at it oppositely, when you nourish the blood, it's almost like sleeping on a nice comfy pillow, you know, or a cloud or something like that. Your body becomes so rejuvenated and replenished that healthy blood goes into the brain, and then the nervous system self-regulates. So
Wow, thank you so much. And I would love to point all our eyes to the chat here, because this is, I think, worth a little celebration here. What I think of, well, all the topics that we're covering here, we went from history to where it all started, what are common symptoms mentally, emotionally, physically, and how we, from different perspectives, can find different solutions, not fixes, not quick fixes, but more long-term, sustainable solutions that are not only, I think, not only for an individual, but for communities and collectively good solutions for our health. And what I see here happening is that we all are sharing our wisdom, and that's another key point, I think, that we didn't have time to focus on, but community. And this is what we're doing here. We're getting together, and even though we're doing it online, it's fantastic to see our friends that we met each other in person. Some of us we didn't meet yet in person, but it's great that we are coming together as a panel here, but also together with the community of people who are joining us. So I would just go through the list because it's very beautiful to hear. Jane started with wisdom, expressing boundaries, clarity, grace, discovering a new sense of self with a capital S, leading and inspiring other women, clarity in terms of needs, and less clarity with brain fog wise, stronger sense of self, inner strength, courage. Community is key. Yeah, I really think so too. So wow, I'm very happy to see this. Well, there's not really time left, I think. Is there anything super burning that you want to share with us, or do you feel like I know that we can all share like hours and hours and hours, but is there anything that we missed or that you think is very important to share just to all the panelists before I'm going to close the webinar today?
I'd like just to lead on from that mention of community. So in Menopause Yoga, we create safe and supportive spaces for women to come together in women's circles. And the teachers support other women in sharing their experiences. And there is something very therapeutic about being in the company of other women also going on that menopause journey. And I truly do believe that if women were encouraged to just naturally come together and share wisdom at this stage in life, then their transition would be easier. There would be less fear because they'd have older women passing down knowledge. There would be the opportunity to express these emotions that have come up that the people have been talking about. And there's the oxytocin benefit of being in the company of other women, that it actually reduces stress and gives you that feel-good feeling. So community absolutely is key.
When women ask me, well, what can I do, besides acupuncture, whatever like that, and I say two things: walking and yoga. Go find a yoga instructor and do yoga. I mean, it's like the number one thing that it works wonders.
And then my final thoughts on that. I think one thing we maybe didn't mention specifically, it's within the context, it's still in line with the self-compassion. So I think that is really, really important to, reframe your relationship to this phase and do what you can or seek out, what does this self-compassion mean towards you, and this self-acceptance and body acceptance and things like that. I left a resource there. It's just a compilation, mostly free stuff. On self-compassion, some of my resources, but the one word or the one concept I don't know that we touched on, joy and pleasure, looking at your daily routine. And it reminded me too of Claire's question on sleep. So in addition to what Brian had said and all those fabulous things that you do, Brian, with sleep, also inviting you to look at your daily routine. And is wanting to get another good sleep, is that another thing you're grasping on? And are you stressed out because then you're not sleeping? So it's this idea of, what's your day like? Can you bring some, pleasure, and
joy and
just
pleasure?
And just kind of sitting back and allowing or creating that joy and pleasure, which then leads to the oxytocin that Petra was talking about, and lots of other physiological responses that we don't have time to get into, but that might be really helpful for you. And reminding yourself of this joy and pleasure helps with that restoration, right? That phase, and it helps to replenish instead of the depletion. It fills you.
Well, thank you so much. I would like to finish this beautiful evening all together with a Dutch word, and it's called vieren. Vieren, I will type it. Vieren means actually to celebrate something. And it has also another meaning. It means vieren is letting go. So I think that's a very beautiful vieren. Yeah, I think that's a very beautiful thing to end up here. So what can we celebrate? Always remember that there is a lot to celebrate. There's a lot of hope. There's a lot of joy and a lot of things to celebrate if we can let go, undoing instead of doing, and be our beautiful, compassionate self. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, the beautiful panel, the participants, and well, wish you all blessed evening, day, wherever you are. We're gonna round up. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.